On April 5, 2026, a specific narrative began to circulate through Western media channels. The discussion centered on the potential for a direct military strike against the Bushehr Nuclear Power Plant in southern Iran. The official broadcast frames this as a necessary, decisive option to neutralize the nuclear ambitions of the adversary. They present it as a clean, high-technology operation. That is the broadcast. The structural reality we face today is far more clinical and far more devastating. Threatening to bomb a functioning nuclear reactor on the coast of the Persian Gulf is not a demonstration of strategic supremacy. It is a confession of geographical ignorance. To understand why a strike on Bushehr represents the ultimate strategic trap, we must peel back the first layer of the onion. We must look past the payload of the bombs and examine the physical mechanics of the environment. For decades, the military doctrine of the United States has been built on the premise of the precision strike. The belief is that with advanced satellite targeting and stealth delivery platforms, a military can surgically remove a specific threat without triggering an unmanageable chain reaction. The public is told that a squadron of F-35 stealth fighters can drop bunker-buster munitions on Bushehr, eliminate the reactor core, and fly home to a safer world. In the world of computer simulations, that model works perfectly. In the physical reality of the Earth, it is a catastrophic miscalculation. An attack on the Bushehr nuclear plant would be catastrophic for the Gulf. This is the core assessment from regional experts, but the implications go far beyond localized environmental damage. Bushehr is not buried deep inside a mountain range like the enrichment facilities at Fordo or Natanz. It sits directly on the coastline. It is a functioning, active nuclear power plant fueled by highly radioactive isotopes. If you breach the containment vessel of an active reactor with a penetrating munition, you do not just destroy a building. You create an uncontrollable radioactive release. You cannot use a stealth bomber to negotiate with a radioactive cloud. This brings us to the ultimate dictator of the conflict: geography. The Persian Gulf is not an open ocean. It is a narrow, shallow, semi-enclosed body of water. The circulation of the currents is notoriously slow. It takes years for the water in the Gulf to completely cycle out into the Arabian Sea. Furthermore, the prevailing wind patterns in this region blow consistently from the Iranian coastline toward the southwest. They blow directly toward the Arabian Peninsula. Geography does not care about military objectives. Physics does not recognize international borders. If the United States or Israel strikes the Bushehr reactor, the resulting radioactive plume and contaminated water runoff will not stay in Iran. The atmospheric winds will carry the fallout directly over the capital cities of the closest allies of the United States. The ocean currents will drag the irradiated water along the coastlines of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. This is the strategic inversion of the modern battlefield. The United States has spent billions of dollars building a massive defensive shield over the Arabian Peninsula. They have deployed terminal high-altitude area defense systems and Patriot missile batteries to shoot down incoming rockets. But a multi-billion-dollar radar system cannot track a radioactive wind. An interceptor missile cannot shoot down a contaminated ocean current. The absolute technological supremacy of the Western Alliance is completely neutralized by the basic flow of the tides. That is not a military strategy. That is a geographic suicide pact. We must now examine the mechanics of survival in the Middle East. This is the second layer of our analysis, and it exposes the fatal flaw in the American operational plan. The allied nations of the United States and the Gulf are hyper-arid desert states. They possess no massive underground aquifers. They have no natural rivers. Their entire biological and economic existence depends on a single, highly vulnerable technology: desalination. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates survive by pumping millions of gallons of seawater from the Persian Gulf, removing the salt, and feeding it into their municipal and industrial grids. It is their only source of life. If a strike on Bushehr releases radioactive material into the Gulf, those desalination plants must immediately shut down. You cannot filter nuclear radiation out of the municipal water supply using standard industrial osmosis. If the plants continue to run, they will pump irradiated water directly into the homes, hospitals, and agricultural centers of 50 million people. If the plants shut down, the cities dry up. You can import natural gas, you can import food, you cannot import enough bottled water by airplane to keep the populations of Riyadh, Dubai, and Doha alive in the middle of the desert. The logistical mathematics of doing so are impossible. By threatening to strike the Iranian nuclear infrastructure on the coast, the United States is not just threatening the regime in Tehran, they are threatening the absolute biological viability of their own strategic partners. Washington is holding a gun to the head of the adversary, entirely unaware that the bullet will pass through the target and strike their own allies standing behind it. Let us connect this geographical reality directly to the global economy. We must trace the domino effect from a damaged reactor in Iran to the bank account of the average citizen in the Western world. If the desalination plants on the Arabian Peninsula shut down due to radioactive contamination, the populations are not the only victims. The industrial base of the global energy system instantly collapses. You cannot refine crude oil into usable fuel without massive, uninterrupted quantities of industrial freshwater. You cannot cool the heavy machinery at the export terminals. If the water stops, the refineries of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates must halt operations immediately. When those refineries go offline, 30% of the daily global petroleum supply vanishes from the market. But the physical disruption is only the first phase of the collapse. The true devastation occurs in the risk assessment departments of the global financial system. The maritime insurance syndicates based in London operate purely on mathematics and risk probability. If a radioactive cloud is drifting over the Strait of Hormuz and the waters of the Gulf are contaminated with nuclear fallout, every underwriter in the world will instantly freeze their coverage. They will not insure a 300-meter supertanker sailing through a radioactive zone. They will not insure the crews. They will not insure the cargo. Without maritime insurance, the global shipping fleets drop anchor. They refuse to enter the region. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a dead zone. Not because it is blocked by military vessels, but because it is mathematically uninsurable. This is the mechanism of power that dictates your reality. This is why a tactical strike on the Iranian coast translates directly into a global macroeconomic depression. The global benchmark price for crude oil will violently recalibrate. We are looking at a trajectory that shatters $150 per barrel and pushes toward $200. When the global price of oil doubles, the cost of diesel fuel doubles. The cost of transporting food and manufactured goods skyrockets. Structural, untamable inflation takes hold of the Western economies. That is why you will pay 30% more for your basic survival needs next month, simply because a military planner 10,000 miles away failed to respect the direction of the wind. This brings us to the ultimate strategic paradox of the current standoff. It is a reality so uncomfortable that the official spokespersons in Washington and Tel Aviv will never acknowledge it on camera. The United States, Israel, and Iran are locked in a cycle of maximum public hostility. But beneath the surface of the rhetoric, the closest allies of the United States desperately need the Iranian nuclear infrastructure to remain perfectly safe and structurally intact. The governments in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi know exactly how the water currents flow. They know that an American bomb dropped on Bushehr will destroy their own nations within a matter of days. Therefore, behind closed doors, the Gulf monarchies are applying massive diplomatic pressure on Washington to ensure that the nuclear facilities are never targeted. The allies of the United States are relying on the structural integrity of the enemy to guarantee their own survival. This is the definition of asymmetric leverage. Iran does not need to threaten to bomb the desalination plants of Saudi Arabia. They simply need to exist on the same body of water. The geography of the Persian Gulf turns the Bushehr nuclear plant into the ultimate geopolitical human shield. Tehran understands this mechanism of power flawlessly. They know that an attack on their coastal nuclear site is an attack on the entire region. This provides them with a profound layer of strategic deterrence that has absolutely nothing to do with their own military capabilities. It is deterrence provided by the fragility of their neighbors. The United States military possesses the raw firepower to reduce the Bushehr facility to rubble within an hour. But raw firepower without strategic foresight is a liability. Washington is paralyzed not by a lack of capability, but by the horrific certainty of the unintended consequences. They cannot pull the trigger without blowing up the foundation of the petrodollar system and triggering the mass evacuation of their own allied capitals. In the next part of this briefing, we will examine how this geographic paralysis forces the United States into a war of prolonged attrition, where the economic burn rate heavily favors the adversary. We will analyze the shifting loyalties of the Gulf states as they realize the American security umbrella cannot protect them from ecological blowback. And we will dissect why the true winners of this stalemate are quietly securing long-term energy contracts in the East. The layers of this strategic failure run deep. The old rules of deterrence no longer apply. Now we must examine the tactical rot and the systemic failure of the American maximum pressure doctrine when it collides with this unalterable physical reality. The administration in Washington projects an image of absolute military dominance. The public is conditioned to believe that the United States possesses an unlimited array of military options, ready to be unleashed at the president's command. The narrative suggests that restraint is merely a choice, a diplomatic courtesy extended to a weakened adversary. That is the illusion. The reality behind the curtain is a severe crisis of strategic paralysis. To understand the depth of this paralysis, we must look at the cold arithmetic of the American arsenal. For the past 20 years, the United States military-industrial complex optimized itself for counterinsurgency operations. They built highly advanced, extremely expensive weapons designed to strike isolated targets with minimal collateral damage in permissive environments like Afghanistan and Iraq. They did not optimize for a high-intensity, prolonged industrial war against a near-peer adversary entrenched in a mountainous, heavily fortified geography. The manufacturing supply chains for these precision weapons, the Joint Direct Attack munitions, the Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, the specialized GBU-72 bunker busters, are incredibly complex. They rely on specialized microelectronics, rare earth minerals, and highly skilled, slow-paced labor. It takes months, sometimes years, to manufacture a single batch of advanced cruise missiles. Since the escalation of global conflicts over the past 4 years, the United States has been draining its stockpiles. They have shipped vast quantities of defense systems to Eastern Europe. They have expended billions of dollars worth of interceptors in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, defending commercial shipping against $20,000 drones. The magazines are running dangerously low. The Pentagon is acutely aware of this deficit. If the president orders a massive, unprovoked strike on the Iranian civilian and industrial infrastructure, because the nuclear option is geographically suicidal, the United States Air Force and Navy will burn through their remaining reserves of precision-guided munitions in a matter of weeks. What happens when the magazines are empty? The United States would be left strategically naked in the face of other global adversaries. A depletion of the missile stockpiles in the Middle East means the United States cannot adequately defend its posture in the Pacific theater. This is the strategic inversion of modern logistics. The most powerful military on the planet is constrained not by a lack of courage, but by a lack of factory output. You cannot execute a campaign of total destruction when your supply chain relies on microchips manufactured half a world away. You do not bomb a country into submission when you do not have enough bombs to finish the job. You bluff. An empty stealth bomber is not a weapon of war. It is a $2 billion glider. Now let us examine the adversary on the other side of the ledger. While the United States relies on a fragile, highly expensive global supply chain, Iran has spent 40 years building an economy of resistance. They knew they could never purchase advanced weapons from the West. Therefore, they engineered a domestic, decentralized military-industrial base. They build solid-fuel ballistic missiles and loitering drones deep inside their mountain networks. They use commercially available technology. They do not need exquisite stealth coatings. They need volume. The United States is fighting a high-technology war with a finite supply. Iran is fighting a low-technology war with a continuous indigenous line of production. In a war of attrition, the side that controls its own manufacturing base always holds the ultimate advantage. The United States fires a $3 million interceptor to destroy a drone built with parts ordered online. This mathematical inequality guarantees that even if the United States wins every tactical engagement, they will eventually lose the strategic war through financial exhaustion. We must now pivot to the broader geopolitical board. We must analyze the silent actors who are capitalizing on this American strategic paralysis. This is the third layer of the onion, and it explains why the global balance of power is actively shifting while Washington is distracted by a conflict it cannot resolve. Who truly benefits from a prolonged, paralyzed standoff in the Persian Gulf? Who wins when the United States exhausts its political capital, its interceptor missiles, and its financial leverage? The answer is found in Beijing and Moscow. The leadership in China is not issuing threats on television. They are not deploying aircraft carriers to the Strait of Hormuz. They are quietly executing the most significant economic realignment of the 21st century. China is the largest importer of energy on the planet. For decades, they have recognized their strategic vulnerability. They knew that in the event of a global conflict, the United States Navy could choke off their energy supply by blockading the maritime transit routes. To mitigate this risk, China needs secure overland energy partners. Iran is the perfect candidate. Iran possesses massive hydrocarbon reserves, and they are completely isolated from the Western financial system. While the United States is threatening to destroy the Iranian infrastructure, China is signing 25-year strategic partnership agreements with Tehran. China is purchasing millions of barrels of heavily discounted Iranian crude oil. And most importantly, they are settling these transactions outside the United States dollar system. They are trading in Chinese yuan. This brings us to the profound, unintended consequence of the American sanctions doctrine. For years, Washington weaponized the dollar. They used the global banking network as a blunt instrument to punish adversaries. They assumed that being cut off from the dollar was a death sentence for any economy. That was a catastrophic miscalculation of global economics. When you weaponize the reserve currency, you do not force compliance. You force the creation of an alternative system. By pushing heavily sanctioned nations like Russia and Iran into the same corner, Washington forced them to integrate. Today, the BRICS economic bloc is actively developing alternative payment clearing mechanisms. The Global South is watching the United States threaten a sovereign nation with geographic and economic ruin, and they are quietly accelerating their plans to decouple from the American financial architecture. Every sanction issued by Washington is a free advertisement for the Chinese financial system. If the conflict in the Middle East escalates and the Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed to Western shipping due to the withdrawal of maritime insurance, the global price of oil will surge past $150 a barrel. The economies of Europe and the United States will face a devastating recession. But China will continue to receive a steady stream of discounted oil from Russia via overland pipelines and from Iran via a heavily protected shadow fleet. China will weather the economic storm while the industrial base of the West grinds to a halt. The United States is doing the heavy lifting. They are burning through their military stockpiles and destroying their own diplomatic credibility. Meanwhile, their primary global competitor sits back, takes notes, and secures the energy resources required to dominate the next century. The war designed to protect American hegemony is the exact mechanism accelerating its demise. Let us bring this back to the domestic reality of the United States. We must connect the geopolitical dots directly to the wallet of the viewer, because the actions taken in the Persian Gulf have a direct, unalterable impact on the standard of living in the West. When the president issues a threat to destroy a national power grid or strike a nuclear facility, the commodity markets price in the risk of a regional war. The maritime insurance companies raise their premiums. The cost of global shipping skyrockets. This means the price of crude oil rises. When oil rises, the cost of diesel fuel rises. Diesel is the blood of the domestic supply chain. It powers the trucks, the trains, and the cargo ships that move every single consumer good. When transport costs rise, the cost of food at the supermarket increases. The cost of manufactured goods increases. This is the definition of structural inflation. For the past 3 years, the Federal Reserve has waged a brutal campaign to suppress inflation by raising interest rates. High interest rates make mortgages unaffordable. They make corporate borrowing expensive. They slow down the entire economy. The central bank was preparing to lower rates to provide relief to the American consumer. But if a military escalation in the Middle East triggers a massive oil shock, inflation will return instantly. The Federal Reserve will be paralyzed. They cannot cut interest rates if energy-driven inflation is ravaging the economy. They will be forced to keep rates high or even raise them further. The tactical decisions made in the Zagros Mountains directly dictate the mortgage rates in the American Midwest. The American citizen is the one who ultimately pays the price for the illusion of dominance. They pay for it at the gas pump. They pay for it at the grocery store. They pay for it in the form of a devalued currency and an inaccessible housing market. The administration knows this. They understand the economic mathematics. This is why the threat to bomb Iran into the Stone Age or to strike Bushehr is a geopolitical bluff. The ruling party faces a critical midterm election in November. A massive spike in gasoline prices and a return of hyperinflation is an electoral death sentence. They cannot afford a real war. They can only afford the optics of a war. They need to project overwhelming strength to satisfy their domestic political base. They need to look tough on television. But behind closed doors, they are desperate to maintain the status quo. They need the oil to keep flowing. They need the shipping lanes to remain open. This leads us to the final, sobering reality of the current strategic landscape. Both the United States and Iran are operating within highly constrained parameters. Iran cannot afford to launch a massive, unprovoked attack that would compel the United States to actually execute its most devastating contingency plans. The Iranian leadership needs to survive to solidify their recent transition of power. Conversely, the United States cannot afford to execute a regime change war or destroy the Iranian infrastructure, because the resulting economic and ecological fallout would destroy the American political establishment, poison its own allies, and accelerate the collapse of the petrodollar. They are locked in a theater of managed escalation. They will trade rhetorical blows. They will launch limited, highly choreographed strikes against proxy targets. They will issue press releases claiming absolute victory, but they will both stop short of the abyss. The danger, however, is that managed escalation is a highly volatile game. When you deploy thousands of troops, advanced warships, and automated drone swarms into a highly congested geographic choke point, the margin for error drops to zero. A single miscalculation by a junior officer, a single malfunctioning targeting sensor, or a single rogue proxy commander can trigger a chain reaction that neither Washington nor Tehran can control. You can manage a strategy. You cannot manage chaos. The mainstream media will continue to feed you a daily diet of panic and triumph. They will dissect the speeches and debate the morality of the threats. They will treat this conflict as a sporting event with clear winners and losers. But the strategic realist understands that there are no winners in a war of economic attrition. There is only a slow, methodical transfer of power from the old empires to the new regional hegemons. The era of uncontested American dominance in the Middle East is over. It was not defeated by a superior military force. It was neutralized by the stubborn reality of geography, the mathematics of asymmetric warfare, and the shifting tides of the global financial system. The board has fundamentally changed. The old rules no longer apply. Behind the narrative, the structural reality dictates a permanent shift in global power dynamics. Position yourself ahead of the curve by mastering the unvarnished strategic truth that drives these inevitable reconfigurations.